I can't remember something like this where you've had a quarterback who you couldn't tag that was entering the final year of his deal that really didn't have much incentive to take anything less than an earth-shattering number because of how he's entering into these negotiations. And that's how it feels with Dak right now.
Welcome into the NFL on Fox podcast. I am Dave Helman. Welcome back to the show. Welcome into the show. If this is your first time, got a busy show for you today. A busy week, as it turns out. Go figure. As soon as I think we're going to have a minute to catch our breath, NFL news is right around the corner. That's the name of the game. If you're not, if you are new to this, please make sure you are subscribed on Spotify. Go make sure you find us on Apple Podcasts. Maybe even give us a review, preferably a 5-star review. We are on all of the social media channels at NFL on Fox Pod. Go find us on Instagram, Twitter, X, whatever it's called, wherever you prefer to get your podcasts and your podcast news. You are going to want to make sure you are subscribed this week in particular. Let's get into it. For starters, a fantastic show for you today, a fantastic conversation. I was joined by my good buddy, Robert Mays of The Athletic, to walk you through some of the lingering questions, some of the interesting storylines as we transition into summer. OTAs, minicamp are on the way, and then the long wait for training camp. What might we be in for when we get there? Player trades, contracts to be signed, all of that good stuff. And like I said, there's a caveat to that, as recently as Monday, we had some major contract news. We will get into that. And then later in the week, like I said, make sure you are subscribed, as the NFL schedule has officially got a release date on Wednesday night. The league will be announcing its 2024 schedule. We will have a recap show for you on Thursday. We'll walk you through the ins and outs, the big games, the primetime games, who's got the toughest looking schedule, which games are we most looking forward to. Maybe you want to book some out-of-town travel. You're going to go to a game this year. You're going to maybe go overseas. You'll have plenty of options for international games as well. So much to get to with the schedule release. Make sure you're back here on Thursday for that. And keep an eye peeled on social media, because we are already seeing the first few games early Monday. The league announced the season opener. As we know, the defending Super Bowl champions always open the season on the first Thursday of September. Thursday, September the 5th, the reigning champion Kansas City Chiefs will kick off, and we now know it'll be against the Baltimore Ravens, the rematch of last year's AFC Championship game. Baltimore heading to KC, reigning champion Chiefs, reigning MVP Lamar Jackson and the Ravens trying to exact some measure of revenge on Thursday night. Couldn't ask for a better one. Two of the best teams from last year going at it to start the season. And then later Monday, we get more news as we find out right here on Fox, Tom Brady getting his debut in style, as his first game as a Fox Sports broadcaster will come week 1 as the Dallas Cowboys travel to Cleveland to face the Browns. So Dallas going up to Cleveland, Dak Prescott, Micah Parsons going against Deshaun Watson, Myles Garrett. Sure to be a big-time matchup between two 2023 playoff teams, and Tom Brady, the GOAT, presiding over all of it in his Fox Sports debut. That's just the first two that we know about, and they're both bangers. So I cannot wait to see what the rest of the 2024 schedule holds. Make sure you are back here to go through all of it once we get it on Wednesday and Thursday. Okay, so that covers us on the housekeeping for that. Like I said, such a phenomenal conversation with Robert Mays about lingering questions, lingering storylines for the upcoming offseason and the summer. I do want to throw in the caveat, like I said, Robert and I recorded this on Monday morning, and as you're going to see, we spent a healthy chunk of time talking about several quarterbacks that are in need of extensions. One of those being Detroit quarterback Jared Goff, who, I don't know, 2-3 hours after we finished recording, did get his extension, signing a new deal with the Lions for in excess of $200 million, $212 million to be exact, $170 million guaranteed on a 4-year deal. So Jared Goff in place to continue with the Lions for the foreseeable future, try to build on that NFC Championship game appearance. We're going to leave the Goff stuff in. I thought it was an interesting conversation with Robert just about where Goff slots in the quarterback landscape, how the Lions might value him. We had no idea at the time it was coming, but I think it aged fairly well with what the numbers wound up being. And now we can turn our attention to several other quarterbacks, including Trevor Lawrence, Tua Tagovailoa, Dak Prescott, Jordan Love. Robert and I got into all of that later in the show. Hopefully that ages a little bit better and those deals can at least wait until you've had a chance to listen to that. But a really fun conversation with Robert Mays about all of those contracts and plenty more heading into this summer. Check it out.
All right, as promised, we've got a lot of storylines, a lot of questions to get to heading into. I'm not naive enough to say it's the dead part of the NFL offseason because there isn't such a thing. I know how that's going to age poorly if I say it, but June, late May, early June, typically dead months on the NFL calendar. So we can kind of look ahead into some questions for training camp and beyond. And who better to help me do that? The host of the Athletic Football Show, my good buddy, Robert Mays. Robert, thank you so much for coming on, man.
Of course, buddy. Anytime. I hope it's the dead part of the calendar. I got married around this time last year, which wasn't an accident. And I'm going on vacation on my anniversary, which isn't an accident, because this is the time where theoretically we can get away.
So you're like doing daily manifestations that no major news.
I think I just don't have a choice. If something major happens, I won't be around to react to it. So that doesn't really matter at this point. There would have been a time where I'd be like, oh man, I got my mic. If something crazy happens, I'll have to do something. But I think that's out the window this time. I'm going to Asia. I can't really pack my podcasting stuff.
It's so good to get to that point where you're like, look, if something happens, I did everything I could. Like, we put stuff in the can. Good for you is what I'm trying to say. It's good to unplug. Before we get to that, before we can take our hopefully dead summer breaks, like I said, the point of this show is to look ahead into some questions we have left over after the draft, some things that might play out as we get closer to the start of the regular season. And I want to start with this NFL quarterback market, which is very interesting to me. It feels like it's flying under the radar how much shit could pop off between now and Labor Day when you're talking about NFL quarterbacks. Because I was prepping for this show and think back a year ago, Robert, Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson had already done their deals. Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert hadn't, but it was a guarantee to happen. Everybody felt good that those deals were going to come down. And now this year, there are as many as 5 guys in need of major deals. And there's not as much certainty about those timelines. I'm curious, for somebody that's covered the league as long as you have, does this feel unique at all to you when you think about Trevor Lawrence, Jared Goff, Dak Prescott, Tua Tagovailoa, and throw in Jordan Love as well? Just the number of guys that need deals, but also potentially the uncertainty around some of those guys.
The reason this feels different is because all these guys are at such strange inflection points. Obviously, we know what's going on with Dak and the Cowboys. I'm sure you've talked about it a million times, but the dynamics at play there, just unlike things we normally see between a team and a quarterback. He has so much leverage, but for whatever reason, they still haven't taken care of it. So that set of dynamics is fascinating to me. The Jordan Love part of this, when was the last time we saw a guy play at that level, but only for 1 year and then need a contract extension? That's the only problem that comes along with this plan that the Packers had. When you have a guy sit for 3 years, then you get 1 year of him as a starter, then you have a decision to make. Based on how he played, he probably deserves $50 million a year, but we saw him start for 1 year. And then Tua, same sort of deal. They've been a really good offense, but is he the guy to run that offense? Very rarely do we see teams walk away from quarterbacks who've had the level of success he has, even if it is partially a product of the pieces around him. So I think just all of the different sets of circumstances surrounding these quarterback extensions or possible quarterback extensions, that's why this year feels different.
I don't know if you want to call it a game or a thought exercise or what, but I was kind of hoping we could go through these guys and I guess rank the likelihood that they get these extensions, because if I had to guess, the majority of them will, for some of the reasons that you just outlined. But again, it doesn't feel as much of a slam dunk as it did last year with some of those guys. Like even the drama with Lamar Jackson requesting a trade, I don't think very many people legitimately thought that was going to happen. It's just a matter of when, not if. This year, I'm not as willing to just chalk that up. So I want to go through these guys. And I mean, let's start from obvious and work down from there, because I do, one way or another, I do think Jared Goff winds up getting an extension in Detroit just based on some of the smoke coming out of there. Would you say you agree with that?
Yes, I'm fascinated by where that number falls when he does get that extension. But based on the history and based on the relationship between him and the franchise, I would be very surprised if they didn't figure something out. That's
something I've been with Fox for 2 years now. I've been covering the NFL for a decade or more. I'm not great at, I mean, and unless it's an obvious situation like a Lamar where you're like, yeah, he's going to set the top of the market. I'm not good at coming down with that number. Like, it seems to me unlikely that Jared Goff sets the market. And you're looking at a guy that's already signed one major extension and set the market back when he was with the Rams. I know you just said you're interested to see. We don't have the answer, but like, where do you see that falling when he does get that deal?
I really don't know, because the way that this is tiered now and the way the quarterback contracts are handed out, we've gone past that era where every next guy got the highest paid contract, right? There was a stretch where Matthew Stafford was the highest paid quarterback. Then Derek Carr was the highest paid quarterback. It feels like we've moved past that time for NFL quarterback contracts. There's a middle class of deals now. If you look at the Baker Mayfield deal, the Geno Smith deal. So my guess is it's probably something of a markup or something in the realm of what Kirk Cousins got, maybe something around what Daniel Jones got, like that $40 million a year type of deal feels right. But I have no idea if Goff's people are going to feel okay about that. Kirk Cousins is coming off a torn Achilles and got $45 million. Daniel Jones hasn't been nearly as good as Jared Goff for nearly as long and got $40 million. So I think there's a chance that there's a little bit of tension and a little bit of friction happening here, because Goff probably thinks that he's worth a decent amount. And the Lions are probably hesitant to give him that because he's not one of those top of the market quarterbacks. So where that lands, I'm very, very curious.
It sounds so easy to say, like, oh yeah, we'll slot Jared Goff in at, again, like, let's say 40 million. That's not what it used to be even 2 years ago. And Jared Goff is coming to the last year of that deal he signed with the Rams. His cap hit this year, $32 million. Like, it's easy for people to say, like, oh, this is where he slots in. I can't wait to see how Jared Goff and his representation feel about that and how that draws out. It feels like the longer we go into the summer, the more that seems to suggest that there's a disconnect there of what Jared Goff is worth, you know?
That's what it feels like to me. The fact that it hasn't already happened, I think, shines a light on maybe what those conversations and the tenor of those conversations has been like so far.
Okay, which, I mean, we'll see what happens. We'll see how long it drags out. But I want to save some time for the next one because, and I've told you many times, I'm an avid listener of your podcast, The Athletic Football Show. Y'all did a fantastic quarterback draft for like the next 3 years. It's an exercise where you like draft a quarterback to build a team around for 3 years. You kind of blew up the internet a little bit when you did it, and which is has a way of happening when you're talking about quarterbacks. I don't want to talk to you about Joe Burrow. I want to talk to you about Trevor Lawrence, though, because as I'm sitting here looking at guys that need a new contract, it seems like a slam dunk that you extend Trevor Lawrence, like number 1 overall pick. He's made the Jags relevant. He's got stats that back it up. And then the deeper you dive into it, you're like, I wish this resume was a little bit better if we're going to make Trevor Lawrence a $60 million quarterback. And I feel weird because like, I think Trevor Lawrence is a very, very good quarterback. I think he has, for as much hype was on him, I don't think it's fair to expect a ton more of him than what he's done for a typically bad organization. And yet when I'm looking at it, I'm like, do I need to see more from this guy? Like, where do you come down on this?
with his background, being the number one overall pick and playing pretty well, I mean, we can argue about where he fits and tier it and all of that. But typically what happens with these guys is, all right, you're the next guy up. You're going to set the market and you're going to get paid. I think Burrow's at 55. So let's say Trevor Lawrence is worth $56 million a year. Write it down. That's just how it's going to go. I don't know if that's how it should go. Right. I mean, I think that's kind of gets back to the conversation of what's happening with Jared Goff. Like, if you're actually tiering these guys for where they belong in the quarterback hierarchy, should Trevor Lawrence get a deal that trumps Joe Burrow's and Justin Herbert, even if you like Trevor Lawrence? And that's what's become kind of complicated about this is I would consider myself a Trevor Lawrence defender from most of the football watching public. But I also don't think I'm all the way there with some corners of the football internet that think he's just a slam dunk top 7 quarterback independent of the circumstances. So that's why this gets a little bit knotty, and I'm not exactly sure where I come down on it.
I knew this, like doing research and going and looking at things really, even if you think you have an educated opinion, it can really open your eyes. And I'm looking at this as I'm prepping, and Justin Herbert, who catches so much hell, who Trevor Lawrence famously helped, the Jags beat the Chargers in that very infamous playoff game. Justin Herbert's resume at the point that he got his extension blows Trevor Lawrence's out of the water. It's not even comparable. I mean, all the numbers are better, counting numbers, touchdowns. You brought it up on your show, the turnover issues. Trevor Lawrence has turned the ball over 60 times through the first 3 years of his career. And so I look at it and I'm like, yeah, there's not a ton backing up the idea that this guy should just vault to the front of the line other than the pedigree. You're drafted number 1 overall. I think that helps. And I mean, I can fire up 24 plays where he does look like that guy, but the overall body of work, I don't know. Like, do you think it would be crazy for the Jags to maybe not let him play this out? Because they did pick up his option. He's under contract for 2025 at roughly, what's the number? $26 million. Do you think it would be crazy if, like, my strategy is always like, just pay the guy as quickly as you can because the price only goes up. But is there any credence to the idea of giving Trevor Lawrence more time to show you that he is that, unanimous number 1 overall pick?
I understand the argument, but I still feel like you're getting into dicey territory there. Because if you pay him now and you can pay him $56 million a year or whatever, a cent more than Joe Burrow made, isn't that a little bit more attractive than paying him $60 million plus after Dak gets his contract? If you want the guy, and I think they probably have a good sense that they do, I think it's worth getting ahead of it, even if there's some risk, because on his own, he has not produced top 12 offensive results so far. I know it's a difficult decision, but I inch toward where you are, where I just think it's better to get ahead of this stuff if you even have a strong indication that you want him to be your quarterback moving forward.
And I think that's eventually where I come down. Like, all of those concerns are very real, but when you have a guy like this, he's only 25 years old. Like, it's easy to lose sight of that when we've known who this guy is since he was a freshman in college. I'm comfortable betting on the long term, I guess, even if the production doesn't back it up. I feel like a lot of people have a hard time stomaching that, though, of like, look, the long term idea of what we're trying to do here is worth it, even if you haven't seen a $57 million quarterback to this point in his career.
I think that's fair. The situation this reminds me of a little bit is back when Matthew Stafford got his extension after his rookie deal, where the production wasn't there, the team results weren't necessarily there. I will say Matthew Stafford's 2011 season is better than anything we saw from Trevor Lawrence so far on his rookie deal. But there still is a disconnect between what sort of quarterback he was seen by the general public and by the league and what the on-field results looked like. And I think that's what makes this difficult. How do you try to extricate who the quarterback is from what he's been surrounded by? And if you look at the Jags specifically, we threw some of these numbers out on our show. They were in the bottom 3 in value lost on wide receiver and tight end screens, early down runs, fumbles, so many different things that have nothing to do with Trevor Lawrence. So I think if you actually tried to step back and you tried to pull apart what he is versus what the circumstances in Jacksonville are, the safest, best route is still probably to pay him and get ahead of the quarterback market as much as you can.
I'm glad you mentioned getting ahead of it. You alluded to Dak Prescott. Let's do it. Yeah, I mean, we talk about it all the time, but I think it has the potential to be the most fascinating of all of these. Because there's a very real chance Dak can leave by simple virtue of the fact that the Cowboys don't control him past the 2024 season. He famously has his no tag clause. They can't trade him. So of all of these guys, there's the least amount of club control involved. And I'm glad you brought up the idea of getting ahead of the market, because you just mentioned paying, let's say, Trevor Lawrence a cent more than Joe Burrow. The dicey thing for the Dallas Cowboys, I think, is you run the risk of this market going up before you could get a Dak deal done, let's say in August. And what if 56 million becomes 62 by the time you're up against the start of the season? Again, knowing that Dak Prescott can hit the open market, it has very explosive potential. Do you actually see that coming to fruition, I guess, is my question.
I kind of do, because does anything about Dak's history, does anything about the way that him and Todd France, his agent, have handled this, lead you to believe that they wouldn't try to exert every ounce of leverage that they have here? What's the downside in playing out this season and waiting until you hit free agency? You could say a major injury. He's already sustained a major injury in a contract year, and it didn't matter. He has been so willing to take this thing further than most quarterbacks ever are. And I think that in this case would be going to free agency and using multiple different bidders to drive this thing up higher than anybody can probably imagine. If you get to free agency next year and you have these teams who are quarterback needy, whether it's the Raiders, what about the Dak on this Steelers team? If you look at the Steelers cap next year, they have a bunch of financial flexibility. If you get three teams that want to make this happen, I think you can get to a price that would be pretty shocking for some people. And if anyone is willing to take it that far, I think it's Dak and his people.
We're talking about trying to look into the future, look into the summer. And this is what I keep thinking about. I covered the Cowboys for a long time. They love to go to training camp out here to California. The weather's nice. You get out of that oppressive Texas heat. Everybody's living dorm room style at the hotel up in Oxnard. And that's where they like to get these. That's where they like to get these contracts done. They've signed so many of their good players while they're in California. I can see the Cowboys being finally facing reality and caving, because that's what I've often said when it comes to an all-pro caliber player. The Cowboys will often talk very tough and drag it out and then give the guy the deal that he wants. They did it with Dak. They did it with Ezekiel Elliott. They did it with DeMarcus Lawrence. I could keep going if I want.
Zach Martin last year.
Yeah, you could go. It goes on and on and on. The difference is, what if we get to August and the Cowboys are like, okay, Dak, you got us. We will pay this price. But then Dak and his people are like, well, no, that's right now's price. But what is the price in a few months? And that is what makes this so interesting and I think you're completely right. Like, if there is a guy who has made enough money and has enough competitive edge to turn down that type of deal because he can get a better one in March, it's Dak. That tracks with everything we know. And I'm so fascinated by the idea of the Cowboys being willing to come to the table in August and Dak and Todd France just being like, no, we're good.
If I'm Dak, what do you think that number is? What do you think the number is from a AAV and guarantee perspective for me to forego free agency next year?
It's got to start with a 6, I think.
I'm looking at 3 years, $180 million with $150 million guaranteed. And if you're not giving me that, then I'm out of here.
Oh, that. Yeah.
Why wouldn't you approach it that way if you were him and his people?
And that's true. And that's a great point. Like, again, there's no club control here. There's no franchise tag. We've seen Kirk Cousins do this. Like, it's easy to think of these extensions in terms of 4 or 5 year deals. It should not shock anybody if Dak Prescott wants to go 3 years at a time for the rest of his NFL career. Like, that shouldn't be surprising.
If you go 3 years, then he's a free agent again when he's 33. And you get a chance to cash in again. And that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about an extreme amount of leverage from the player side in a way that we very rarely see. Typically, if you're a quarterback, all you can try to do is take it to the franchise tag and hope a team isn't willing to do that because whatever reason, whether you're available for trade like Lamar was last year, but so few guys are willing to do that. At the end of the day, the team still has the tag to use. I can't remember something like this where you've had a quarterback who you couldn't tag that was entering the final year of his deal that really didn't have much incentive to take anything less than an earth-shattering number because of how he's entering into these negotiations. And that's how it feels with Dak right now.
I've said this on other shows, on other appearances before. I don't trust that the Cowboys realize the situation that they're in. And I get it. I mean, the Cowboys, they have the brand power. They have the money when they want to spend it. It reminds me of being like in college and being like, yeah, I can get away with studying for this the night before. I do it all the time. Sure, I'll get like a B, but that'll be fine. Relative to how much work I put into this, that'll be fine. But I'm worried the Cowboys are approaching it that way, and it's like, guys, no, man, like you don't have the control here. And if you show up to the table at training camp expecting to do the very normal deal that you've done with so many guys, I'm not convinced it's going to go the way you think it is.
Kirk Cousins got $100 million guaranteed and $45 million a year at age 36 coming off of a torn Achilles. What do you think Dak Prescott would be worth on an open market with multiple teams who would probably be bidding for him?
I'm starting to think we're going to see, and maybe, it's contingent on how far the Cowboys are willing to go, like how much they're willing to give up. Cause I really think that's what it comes down to. It was like, if you're willing to write Dak's number on a blank check, then we can talk. But otherwise, I really think we're going to get to see it, which just as somebody who's followed this for a long time, as a fan of the parity of the NFL, I would be so excited to see that if we get to a point where 3 to 5 teams are bidding for Dak's services in March. That would be insane.
And then he leaves, and then the best that you can do is a 3rd round comp pick, which we know they would get because they wouldn't sign anyone in free agency. So it's not a hypothetical like it is with some of these other teams, but I still don't think that's the type of consolation prize you would want for a top 8 quarterback in his prime. And that's exactly what Dak is. And that's why it's so crazy that they've let it get this far.
A 3rd round comp pick, Trey Lance on a 2-year prove it deal, and oh, by the way, Dak's dead cap charge on your salary cap is still $35 million because you restructured his deal. It would be bad for the Cowboys, but does that mean they are willing to let Dak name his price? I don't know the answer to that. I cannot wait to see what happens when they get out here to Oxnard. Let's do it. It's not the same situation because the Miami Dolphins have all of the club control that the Cowboys don't have. The reports coming out of Miami right now are that the Dolphins are in earnest discussions with Tua. But I don't know how much I buy that. Like, I don't know. Tua was phenomenal last year. If you could promise me he's healthy, I think I feel okay about paying him a long-term extension. But I can't help but think about where Mike McDaniel comes from and the 49ers and the Rams track record with shuffling quarterbacks and being willing to move on. And I just don't completely buy that the Dolphins are in on this as they say they are. What do you think?
If I were them, I would be hunting out an upgrade somewhere along the way. I would be thinking about that. But there's a chance that they're just looking at the landscape and saying, where are we going to get that from? And could we even afford one? Right? Is this a Dak team in 2025 if they end up moving on from Tua? And they decide that he's not worth whatever sort of extension he's looking at. Maybe, but they don't have the financial flexibility that some of these other quarterback needy teams might. So I don't know what the best path forward is for them. Typically, I would say I wouldn't want to commit to somebody with his track record that I think has a somewhat replicable skill set within a very well-designed offense. But there's a chance they're looking at the alternatives and they just decide to take the safer route.
Would you have a problem with it if they did? Like, let's just say, and the same thing that we talked about with Trevor, like if they slot Tua in on top of Joe Burrow, preferably early so that he's like the first guy to sign. And let's say by March of next year, he's like the 4th or 5th highest paid quarterback. Would you dislike that? Like, would it bother you in terms of like the Dolphins' long-term outlook?
Yes, because what does a $55 million Tua, and I don't know what the roster would even look like in 2026. Tyreek Hill is going to be 32, or let's play it forward even further. In 2027, when Tua is making $55-60 million against the cap, and you don't have Tyreek Hill, you have Jalen Waddle on some sort of extension, but you have to then build the rest of your roster with Tua at 55 million as a starting point. That would be worrisome to me. I mean, what they've been and why they've been successful is that they've been able to build an absolute Death Star around him, whether it was with Mike McDaniel, the receivers, they were able to pay for Teron Armstead. I mean, this team was buoyed in large part by the resources they had, the excess resources they had by that rookie quarterback contract. Things look very, very different if Tua is now the centerpiece of who you are financially, schematically, in a way that he didn't have to be over the last couple of years. And that timeline, if I were the Dolphins, that would worry me.
It's funny because I've said for years, like eventually a team will say no. Maybe it's the Dallas Cowboys this summer. Like eventually I think it will become commonplace for teams to say, we'll take our chances finding the next guy as opposed to paying a premium for a good quarterback. But when I'm sitting here, like imagine, like if I'm trying to play out running the Miami Dolphins, I'm so scared of that prospect, knowing how long and gross of a journey it can be to find that guy. I think if you told me I could get Tua slotted in, just easy peasy, like I said, have it taken care of so that he's not on top of the market for longer than a couple of weeks or whatever, I think I would probably just do it because the alternative is that scary to me. But that's why I brought up Mike McDaniel's history. I mean, there are coaches and there are systems where it seems like you can work around this. And I do have to admit, Miami feels like one of those.
Who was the last quarterback that there was hemming and hawing about that ended up getting an extension that was as fat as his team wanted, and it ended up working out well for the team that signed that deal? I think Dak is probably in that conversation, but the two guys I would point to who got paid right around when Dak got paid, how quickly did the Rams and Eagles regret those Jared Goff and Carson Wentz extensions? And how much of a lesson should teams learn from how those moves played out specifically?
Yeah, well, see, this is opening a can of worms. I think you could also argue, though, the speed with which the Eagles and Rams did those deals made it easier to move on from those quarterbacks when they realized they had made a mistake. So I get your point that is an argument for not doing it, but it also could be an argument for doing it quickly, right? No,
yes,
I'm not selling you.
Well, I just think that if you ask them if they would do those deals again, they would probably say no, right?
Yeah.
They probably would understand that we need an off-ramp or we need an upgrade somewhere. So trying to get ahead of that rather than signing the deal and then having to weasel your way out of it, I just think that would be a team would be well served if they approached it that way. But again, I'm with you. It's terrifying to wade into the unknown like that. The Eagles did a very good job of giving themselves an alternative with Jalen Hurts. Obviously, the Rams had to pay up a ton for Stafford, and it ended up working out. But that was a very thin needle that they threaded. I mean, that Rams team was not the best team in the NFL that year that they won the Super Bowl. They got a couple really good breaks because they were really aggressive. So there is a ton of risk that comes along with this, even in the situations where it's worked out. And if you're Chris Greer and you're Mike McDaniel and you don't have endless job security because of how the last couple of seasons have ended, I understand taking the bird in the hand. I just think that too often we don't take into account the risk that comes along with that, because there's plenty of opportunities cost and there is plenty of downside to giving out that contract, even if you theoretically know what you're getting.
What makes this so fun is I can come up with a case for all of these teams to not do these deals, and it's defensible at least. So I'm curious to see if they agree with us. Last one, ironically, and you mentioned this, like we have 10 games of Jordan Love that suggests that he's the truth. But it's crazy. Like, it's crazy how bought in I am on that, though. I'm just like, yeah, like pay him, whatever. I don't care. Like, I don't know. Maybe I just really like watching him play, but I don't really have any qualms about the Packers making him very, very rich.
It was funny. Last week we did a show. We're doing a series of shows on the Athletic Football Show, but lingering questions about each division. So stuff that just didn't get answered for one reason or another by the end of last season that we wanted to go revisit. And mine with the Packers is the arrow just pointed up forever? Like, is this just full steam ahead blast off with the offense? Or are there maybe some holes and some blemishes that we're overlooking? And I went back and I watched a couple late season games, and I looked at all the numbers for their offense last year. And even wanting to poke holes, I couldn't. It's like, yeah, no, I just think they're going to be really good. I think he's really good. I think Matt LaFleur is really good. And I think that they're going to be set up to be a top 10-ish offense for the foreseeable future, as long as he's the quarterback. So even though we've only seen 1 year, and even if it was a mixed bag early on and it didn't end super well, I would be pretty comfortable with handing him that sort of deal if I were the Packers. And I know those would be some famous last words, most likely.
Maybe. I mean, all you have is you have the data that is in front of you, and like the way that it was trending. And I know it's not going to be that amazing every time out for the Packers, but the way that Love looked, and it looked like, to your point, it looks sustainable to me, because you're not asking too much heavy lifting of any one component of your offense. I mean, their running game caught fire in the last 4 or 5 weeks of the season last year. I think that's a big part of it. You can basically always count on the Green Bay Packers to have a solid offensive line by hook or by crook. So with all of that in mind, I'm not asking Jordan Love to be superhuman, but he does look like he has that capability as he continues to progress.
There's no doubt. And I also think that they have some wiggle room as they try to keep building this thing. Even if they end up paying Jordan Love and he's counting for, I don't know, let's say they gave him an extension and it's $35 million in the first year. They still have a decent amount of cap space heading into 2025 with a Jordan Love extension. So if they get to the end of the season and they just say, you know what, this piece it together with all these young kids at the receiving group, it was important to see that through. I understand the original vision and the original plan, but we need to go get a difference maker on offense in order to take this thing to the next level. They can do that while paying Jordan Love. So that's why I'm okay with this, because it's not like the Dolphins where you've really maxed yourself out. That's what the team building process was over the last couple of years. They went to get aging, expensive players. They restructured a lot of those aging, expensive players to pry this window open as much as possible. That's not what we're talking about with the Packers and Jordan Love. They've given themselves a ton of margin for error here. And that's why I would be fine doing it, because you're going to have other ways to improve your team even after you give Jordan Love that contract.
It's so interesting because we're here in mid-May. I think half of these deals could be done by the time teams report to training camp. I wouldn't be surprised if we're still waiting on the first domino when the preseason starts, just kind of the way these things go. We'll see how all of that unfolds. I think it has the potential to be a very interesting summer for the quarterbacks. I wanted to get your thoughts on, and it happens every year. There's trade speculation. We love to, do the Photoshops and imagine where the next wave of star players are going. But the hard truth of the matter is, like, if it doesn't happen over draft weekend, it doesn't typically bear out. Like I looked up in recent years, like I guess Baker Mayfield got traded to Carolina in June of 22, and Julio Jones, who was not that Julio Jones, a very veteran Julio Jones, got traded to Tennessee in June of 21. But whether you're talking about the 49ers receivers, Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel, T. Higgins and Trey Hendrickson in Cincinnati, like there are some Pro Bowl, all-pro caliber players that have been linked to trades, but do we typically see that in the summer? Is that something you would expect to happen before the season gets going?
I think it would be hard with players of a certain financial tier, just because you've already kind of set the table for what your salary cap is going to look like that year. So you have guys that people have thrown around, whether it's Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, some of these guys who have bigger base salaries. I think that would be harder to fold in if you were one of these teams making a deal. But like the trade I remember a couple of years ago that I think makes a lot of sense for like a later offseason trade is like the deal that sent CJ Gardner-Johnson to the Eagles. He was a mid-round pick. He wasn't making any money. So those types of deals, you can fit those contracts in even as a last-minute acquisition. And that's why somebody like Marshawn Lattimore is interesting, just because he has a really small base salary. So pretty much any team that wanted to trade for him could fit him in under their cap this year. Whether or not the Saints are motivated to do that, because they only really save like $4 million if he's traded after June 1st, I think that's an important question. But those are the types of things I'd be looking at. Who can be moved without a lot of friction or without a lot of financial roadblocks built into their contract right now?
And I think another element of that would probably be, for the most part, and again, it can happen during the summer, but like, I think in a lot of cases, teams want to get to camp. The Saints are a great example. Like, it sounds great to say we have so many cornerbacks. We just drafted one in the second round. We can trade Marshawn Lattimore if we want to. But wouldn't you want to get to camp and see if Kool-Aid McKinstry is ready to be a guy for you before you start engaging in those types of conversations?
Yeah, maybe. And that's why something, maybe let's say it's middle of August, end of August, a deal like this happens. Whether it's Lattimore, there are a couple other guys we talked about last week, like Baron Browning, for example. Baron Browning is somebody who's still cheap. He's in the last year of his rookie deal. The Broncos just took another bendy edge rusher in the first 3 rounds of the draft. So I don't know if there's going to be headline splashy moves being made because of how hard it is to fit those into your plans when we get into August and early September. But I do think that there are a couple lesser known guys on cheaper deals that I would be sniffing around about if I were a team.
Which, great way to look at it, which is it's the nice, intelligent way of saying, like, it's much rarer to see these guys that are waiting for big deals. I mean, T. Higgins is just the one that comes to mind because we've been talking about him for so long. I guess it's theoretically possible you could trade for a guy like that and worry about the extension later, but 9 out of 10 times you're not going to do that deal unless you're willing to sign that extension right away. And at this juncture in the NFL calendar, there just aren't very many teams financially ready or willing to do that type of thing.
Absolutely. And I also think with T. Higgins and Trey Hendrickson specifically, it would shock me if either one of them were moved. One, because that's just not how the Bengals have traditionally operated. They don't really make trades. They're not very proactive or active at all in those sorts of ways. And that's okay. That's just not how they do things. But the other part of it is they want to win the Super Bowl this year. I mean, that's part of the reason they haven't moved T. Higgins yet, and a part of the reason that they tagged him, because they're trying to do everything they can to win this season. If you were going to trade T. Higgins, the move would have been to do it before the draft to get yourself a piece that could help you in 2024. So with those two guys specifically, I would be really surprised if either of them were not on the Bengals roster heading into next season.
We can analyze what T. Higgins's Carolina Panthers contract will look like in 2025, I guess. Although in the here and now, that was when we got done with quarterbacks, I meant to ask, and maybe this could be a lengthy conversation that we might not have time for, but T. Higgins, obviously a guy, it looks like he's going to have to wait his turn. Are you surprised at all at the lack of movement in the receiver market when you think about CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson? Obviously, Brandon Ayuk didn't get traded. He's waiting on a deal. This feels like another situation as the quarterbacks where we could see this play out all the way up to the start of the season before one of these dominoes winds up falling.
You can correct me if I'm wrong here, but this is what it feels like to me. It seems like some of these other guys, whether it's CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, they're just waiting to see what happens with Justin Jefferson. Because I wouldn't want to sign a deal before Jefferson does, because it seems right now, after the deal that A.J. Brown got, after the deal that Amon-Ra St. Brown got, Justin Jefferson is well within his rights to ask for a contract that tops the one Nick Bosa got from the Niners last offseason that made him the highest paid non-quarterback in the league. So if I'm CeeDee Lamb, why would I want to sign a deal when the top of the wide receiver market is $30 million, when I could just wait for Justin Jefferson to sign his, when the top of the wide receiver market becomes $35 million? So that feels like the next big domino that has yet to fall. And it seems like that's what people are still waiting on.
Let me ask you this. And I covered the Cowboys for so long. That is so much of my makeup, for lack of a better word. And there's so much angst about CeeDee Lamb being unsigned. He's counting $17 million against the cap. This is something that the Cowboys, I think, could have seen coming. And I understand there's a fair argument to be made of like, hey, CeeDee and his people have to come to the table. And if they're waiting on Justin Jefferson, then there's only so much you can do. What about the idea of like, and I'm not interested in who you think is better, But look at CD Lamb's numbers the last 2 years. I think you could make a compelling case of like, okay, well, just bring CD the Justin Jefferson deal then. Like, is there any logic to that of like, instead of waiting, bring CD Lamb the deal that is going to top Nick Bosa? Because I'm going to guess you have to do something like that anyway.
You think the Cowboys would really do that, though?
No.
You think the
I
Cowboys
don't.
would be in the market of resetting the wide receiver market when they don't have to? That would be surprising to me. But there was just no reason to wait. And part of the problem here is that the wide receiver market was artificially inflated, right? So Tyreek Hill had $30 million a year as his AAV, if you look at the numbers. But that was propped up by a very, very big number in the final year of his deal. The same thing was true with Devontae Adams. So the move would have been, you try to sign a guy to a real $30 million a year extension last offseason that tops the Tyreek Hill deal. But now, with the deal that Amon-Ra St. Brown got and with the deal that A.J. Brown got, things have shifted. So I just think that Justin Jefferson is the one that's probably going to end up dictating this, because right now, today, if you're CD Lamb's people, the most you could realistically ask for is probably a small markup on the A.J. Brown deal. But if Justin Jefferson comes down after that and his number is somewhere around 35, then you're justified in asking for $34 million a year. So I just don't think there's a ton of incentive in waiting. And the Cowboys, the difference with the Cowboys, CD Lamb compared to Dak Prescott is at the end of the day, if they want to use the tag on CD Lamb, they can. We know that's probably not the best outcome here, but at least it's an option for Dallas if they continue to wait.
Yeah, I could see that playing out even longer than we already thought, depending on what the Jefferson number is and how long it takes us to get there. I remember talking about this with you like more than a calendar year ago. And it seems like one way or another, it's a foregone conclusion. Like Jefferson, CD, some of these guys, I'll throw in Jamar Chase just because of the first 3 years production is crazy. Some of these guys are going to get these insane receiver contracts. But do you think we are getting closer to that bubble where teams aren't willing to keep doing that? And I was very interested to see, for instance, Devonta Smith signs a deal for $25 million a year, which is still a boatload of money, but it doesn't come close to continuing to escalate this conversation. I wonder if we are getting closer to this realm where you have to have some crazy bona fides to even sniff setting what the market is going to be here soon.
I'm fascinated by how it plays out because I don't know where the inflection points are going to be. It feels like Amon-Ra St. Brown getting $30 million a year is a pretty good indication for where this is headed. Teams aren't willing to walk away from players that they think are number one or number two options within a passing game. My response would have been, if you've already paid your number one guy, are you going to be able to afford paying your number two guy? The Eagles are a unique case. The Eagles, in the way that they handle the salary cap, it's fake money right now for the most part. They're pushing so much out into 2032, 2033 with some of these deals that they can afford two guys. The Bengals, who operate, let's say, in a much more traditional fashion, told us they weren't able to pay two guys. So where you fall along the Bengals to Eagles spectrum, if you've already paid a receiver, that's one spot that I'm looking at. But I think the guys that are getting squeezed out are the true number two and number three options. If you look at the way that market has gone, where Christian Kirk got $18 million a year, I think it was 2 off seasons ago, the 2022 off season. Now, guys that I would say are in a similar range, Jerry Jeudy got 17.5 2 years later. So I think that is where it's going to get depressed a little bit, because as teams look at the influx of talent in the draft, it's hard to find A.J. Brown again. Maybe it's not as hard to find Jerry Jeudy again. But that doesn't mean the top of the market will be depressed, because I think teams, like same way that you were talking about with quarterbacks, they're afraid to lose these guys. I think we're going to see a similar thing with these true blue number one receivers, where teams are just willing to pay whatever they have to because they're not willing to live that Treylon Burks for A.J. Brown life that we've seen play out already.
Yeah. Sorry, Titans fans. Sorry for bringing that one up. But no, I mean, it's easy to imagine a world where 5 or 6 of these guys can name their price, and then everything else is up to a team's discretion. And that, I mean, T. Higgins becomes very interesting because, yeah, clearly the Bengals are signaling their intent there. But how much can T. Higgins command on an open market where a team potentially sees him as their real deal number one? I can't wait to see. I don't know if it's possible to answer that question right now.
My sense of this is that T. Higgins wanted number one receiver money, and the Bengals said, you're not a number one receiver. If T. Higgins was willing to take the Michael Pittman extension this offseason, I think he'd be a Bengal for the next 3 years. But I don't think he's willing to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my feel on this, is that we're going to see it tiered out, where you have the top of the market or guys that are, kind of true number one options are making somewhere between 30 and 35 million. A.J. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson. And there's going to be a significant step down from that between $8 and $10 million. That's where Devontae Smith is. That's where Michael Pittman is. Calvin Ridley signed his contract there. I think T. Higgins, that's what the Bengals would have been willing to give him. So I just think they're going to be stronger delineations between the guys at the top and the guys on that second stage, the same way there is with the quarterback contracts right now. We've seen those levels start to crystallize a little bit. That Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr, Daniel Jones level, and then the guys that are at 55 million, the Geno, Baker Mayfield level, that's an entirely another step down. So I feel like that's where the receiver market is trending in the same way that the quarterback market is a little bit.
And we will see what the top of it looks like. I assume by the end of the summer, but I also thought Justin Jefferson would be under contract by now. When he was like at a Timberwolves game a couple weeks ago, and everybody was like, "Oh, he's in town for a reason. Something's going on," and we're still waiting. So we'll see what happens there. I could talk to you all day, Robert. We're trying to keep this somewhat concise. So I'm gonna roll several things in together here at the end. I'm just gonna do like dealer's choice. Is there a team or a situation that you are particularly interested to watch as we move toward training camp, as we get closer to the actual season? It could be, a team with coming back from a major injury. I mean, like Aaron Rodgers and the Jets stand out to me, as well as Kirk Cousins coming off of his injury in Atlanta. There's obviously several very exciting situations with rookie quarterbacks. Is there a team that just gets you particularly intrigued for July and August when you finally get to see what it looks like, how this team is coming back after executing this offseason plan?
I feel like this is the easy answer, and maybe I'm a parody of myself, but the Bears. I mean, what's going to happen with Caleb Williams and what's going to happen with that group of skill position players in a offense with a first-year offensive coordinator? I don't think I'm too close to it to say it's one of the most interesting situations in the entire league and how that ends up playing out. So that's near the top of the list for me. I cannot wait to see what the Jim Harbaugh, Justin Herbert Chargers look like. Are they going to be good this year? Is this more of a long scale rebuild than we're giving it credit for? What does that offense look like structurally with Justin Herbert? The last time we saw Greg Roman as an offensive coordinator, Lamar Jackson was his quarterback. So what does that even look like when you have Justin Herbert? And then a couple of these other rookie quarterback teams. I just am very interested in what Drake May is early on for New England as they kind of turn the page. I mean, there's so many different layers to how different the Patriots are. You have Drake May there now. You have an entirely new offensive coaching staff, run an entirely new offensive system there for the first time in 25 years since Bill Belichick got there. So those are the ones I would quickly throw out, but I'm sure we could talk about 20 teams that I'm interested in watching.
For anybody that doesn't know, Robert, a Chicagoan, a lifelong Bears fan, I've been meaning to ask you just privately, I'll just do it on the podcast, like, what's the vibe in Chicago like right now? Like, it's such a big city. There's two baseball teams playing. Like, is there a noticeably tangible energy post Caleb?
Yes. People are watching every throw that they've made available to the media in rookie minicamp to see what it looks like with him throwing to Rome Odunze. He's showing up at all these sporting events. He was at the Cubs game. He was at the Sky game. Every time he's on camera, he gets a standing ovation at this point, and people are losing their minds. And that's exactly how it was going to be. I know that people in this city loved watching Justin Fields, and it provided them with excitement at quarterback that we've very rarely seen in the 36 years that I've been on this earth. But as soon as the page was turned to a guy like Caleb Williams with his presence, with his upside, with his track record, people are going to get very excited. And that is what it feels like right now. It's almost scary how much excitement and how much anticipation there is now, considering the history of that position and what has happened to people that root for this football team.
I'm going to say that's the mark of a real fan is when you're you're looking out for the other shoe. Like, where is it? There's too much going our way right now. Where and when is this going to go wrong?
There is a chance that he breaks every Bears passing record for a season-long record as a rookie.
Absolutely.
It would be a solid rookie season. It wouldn't even be like a historically good rookie season. It would be a solid rookie season. And he might be the most prolific passer in the history of the franchise for 1 year. That's what we're talking about here. I
know, like, people were excited about Fields. I get it. Everybody gets excited for a rookie quarterback, but this really does feel different. I'm not from Chicago. I don't want to insert myself there, but like, it feels like if you could have told people in 2016 that the Cubs were going to make a run, that's what it feels like in terms of just like everybody being that dialed up ahead of time. I really hope it lives up to the hype, because Chicago as a successful football town is just something I want to see. I want to see what that looks like.
If he throws for 4,000 yards and 30 touchdowns, it would be the best single season a Chicago Bears quarterback has ever had.
It's incredible. Like, I never get tired of hearing that stuff. It's just, it's an easy answer for a reason, but I'm with you. I'm going to throw out, and I'm not doing this just to placate our wonderful producer, Justin Graver. Oddly enough, I'm so intrigued by the Tennessee Titans, because this could be an incredible success story or just a dumpster fire that we remember for years and years. Like, if this doesn't go well in Tennessee, we'll be doing podcasts years from now where we're like, oh, careful. That's what the Titans did when they dropped $300 million on a 5-win team. Or with everything they've done for Will Levis, like, maybe this is just the latest AFC South team to find their quarterback in a, whatever it is, 15-month span. I can't wait to see how it goes, because I'm not sure there's a team with more up-down variance than the Tennessee Titans in terms of could be a disaster, could be surprisingly really good. I don't know. I don't know where it goes.
You asked me which teams do I think could go worst to first this year. And
I did ask you that.
And I do think the Titans are an intriguing option. And this is my read on the Titans. I think even if it goes well, they're a team that could stumble into a double-digit win season. The Colts aren't there yet. The Texans take a slight step back after what last year looked like, and they're the winner of a muddied, kind of watered-down AFC South, but that's as far as they go. That's kind of what this feels like, because a lot of the moves that they made, they bought free agents and signed free agents or acquired people that are getting older. Chidobe Awuzie is on a third contract. L'Jarius Sneed is older than you think he is. Calvin Ridley is 30. DeAndre Hopkins, who they acquired last year, he's 32, is going to be 33 by the time he's done with that contract. So it just feels like they're a team that, while they got better because they added a lot of talent, I don't know what the runway is to be more than a surprising wild card team unless Will Levis is wildly good. And I think he can be better than he was last year, but I'm not quite willing to say that he's on track to be a top half of the league quarterback quite yet. I still want to see that.
I completely agree with you, but here in May, I just can't help but daydream. And I'm like, if the guy that flashed a handful of times in the second half of last year shows up consistently, that is just a surprisingly exciting team, I would say. Of course, like I said, am I going to pick them to win the AFC South? No. Am I very excited to watch them in the preseason and assign way too much to every good Will Levis play? Absolutely. I can't wait for that. It's my favorite time of year is when I get to ignore all of my dumb takes during the preseason and just build up all of the stuff that's happening that I agree with. That's what this is all about, right?
I do think that they could be a fun team to watch. I mean, because listen, he may not be a perfect quarterback yet, but he's got a cannon. And he's willing to do some wild stuff. We did a show. We recorded one last week about the AFC South that's going to run a little bit later in June. And so I went back and watched a couple Will Levis games. And just the reckless abandon he plays with and the complete disregard for his physical well-being, it's entertaining. At the very least, I am going to enjoy any single matchup between teams in the AFC South this year. And I think it's been quite a while since you've been able to confidently say that.
Yes. I mean, like the AFC South felt like such a punching bag for so long. And now here I am legitimately intrigued by every single team in that division. And maybe even like thinking several of them could make some legitimate noise. It's exciting to think about. It's too much to get to in one show, man. I knew this was going to happen. We're running out of time. That just means, we'll have to bring you back as we get closer to training camp, as we get closer to the start of the season. Robert, I really appreciate it, man. Please enjoy your downtime, enjoy your trip, and we will catch up with you soon. That does it for the show. Thanks again so much to Robert Mays for hopping on. Thank you for listening. And remember, this is not it for the week. We will be back on Thursday with our NFL schedule show. So much analysis, news, takes, if you will, about the schedule to be that is coming out Wednesday night. We'll be here Thursday. So make sure you're subscribed on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. If you wanted to leave us a 5-star review, that would be even better. You can go make sure you're following on all the socials, like we said, at NFL on Fox Pod. Wherever you get your NFL news, wherever you get your podcasts, you can find us there. And we will be there on Thursday helping you make sense of the 2024 NFL schedule. I can't wait. I'm sure you can't either. We will talk to y'all then. As always, I appreciate it so much.